Hi Sparkies. Tonight you are continuing in Red Jewel 3. Now you started out pretty easy last week with just the first 5 books of the Old Testament. This week in Red Jewel 3.3 and 3.4, you will tackle the next 15 books, which will take you through the history books and into the poetry books. Now, the Old Testament history books cover pretty much the years from 1400 to 500 BC. So it is the history of the Israelites from 1400 years before Jesus until 500 years before Jesus. In these books, we read about the judges of Israel, the kings of Israel, and the prophets of Israel. Now, I have a map to show you here, okay? So this is a map of the world, and here is the place where the Israelites lived. And this is the history we are learning about when we read the history books of the Bible. Now, it is kind of a small area compared to the whole world that God created. So I want you to understand is that there were people living in other parts of the world also. They had their own way of living, they had their own cities, and they even had their own way of worshiping. So let's take a look at some of the people who lived in these other areas. So I'm going to start over here. Now, just to give you a frame of reference, this is Florida right here. So we're talking about this part of the world right here. And they had what was called the Olmec civilization. Okay, now it existed from about 1200 BC to 400 BC. Now, this was something really interesting I found. So they made these huge stone carvings of heads. Okay, so these would have been like 10 feet tall and weighed like 8 tons. So that's about the size of a really large elephant. They also had sort of a ball game that they played. So here's a sort of a drawing of that, and I don't know if you can tell. There's some people there, and there's a ball here. So in this ball game, they had rubber balls, and then they had these, it had a wall, like a hoop coming out the side of it. So instead of a basketball hoop that goes this way, it would have been a hoop that came out of the wall, and you had to get the rubber ball through there, okay? Kind of different, but maybe that's where basketball came from. Okay, now, up here, okay, so this is what is now Europe. So up here is what was called the Hallstatt culture. They had these amazing hill forts, okay? So the land up there is very mountainous, very hilly, and so they would create these forts out of the earth to protect themselves, okay? They also had these really neat, this is a bucket that's made out of bronze. Can you see all that carving that's on there? So that all came from the Hallstatt culture, which was up here, okay? Now, over here, this was called the Lapita culture, okay? And this is what we would know as the Pacific Island area now. That would be also what we know as Australia now, okay? So that was the Lapita culture. Now, they had pottery also. They were around from about 1500 to 500 BC. They had this very beautiful pottery. These are some broken pieces of it. And can you see that face there? That's made into the pottery, okay? Okay, and then down here in what we would know as Africa now, so right about here, that was something called the Nok culture. It was N-O-K, Nok. All right, they were also around from about 1500 to 500 BC. They used iron to make tools and weapons. Now, they also did some sculptures, okay, so here's one. They used terracotta, so it's kind of like a ceramic, okay, and for theirs they would all have these really fancy hairstyles. Sometimes they were braided or up in buns or all kinds of different things. a lot of the times their sculpture would have one knee that was bent up and then the head would be resting on that bent knee. Okay, so back to our history that we're studying. So God created the world and everything in it. And it was God's plan that people would always be in a relationship with Him. But people messed that up. And as the world continued to be filled up with people, they spread all over the place. They made up their own ways of worshiping. They worshiped things that were not the one true God. So from all the people on the earth, God chose the nation of Israel. They were to display God to all the world so that everyone would learn of the one true God. And from the nation of Israel came Jesus, the Savior of the world. Now, before Jesus returned to heaven, He told His disciples to go into all the world and tell everyone the good news about Jesus. So it started here, and the good news is here in Florida where we are, right? And it is in many other areas of the world as well. But it's not everywhere yet. So the job that Jesus gave the disciples, it's not finished yet. And it's up to us now to continue sharing the good news about Jesus. For now, you keep learning the names of the books of the Old Testament, and I will see you again next week.